Today, got a quick video for you about this C64 running on a Raspberry Pi. Stick around. So I did a YouTube short on this machine the other day, but I thought a little longer video would do it some justice. I did spend a lot of time on this and I thought it was a pretty cool project, so I just wanted to talk about it some more. So I'm running Maze Master here, but I've got a bunch of ROMs loaded. So let me talk a little bit about this emulation that I'm running. As noted in the short, this is actually running on a Raspberry Pi 0W. I glued some of these ports in just because it wasn't really a good way to bolt them into this 3D printed case stuff that was in the back. So a little bit of history about this machine in this case. I recently saw on Facebook Marketplace somebody posted a whole bunch of Commodore equipment. I messaged him and asked if they were willing to work, and they were. And so we got to talking, and it turns out that her son had actually owned these, but he had become recently deceased. And she wasn't looking to make a quick buck. She was looking to find a good home for these things. And I'm sure I'll have more videos about the other stuff. I made a short about the SX64 that was included there, which actually fully worked right out of the box, so that was great. This machine came like this. The 3D printing the gentleman had done, and he had some different things plugged into these, and they fit a little better than what I had, so clearly he was a 3D printing whiz, or bought equipment to go around what was there. But I didn't quite have the right stuff, and I didn't want to try to figure out how to make these things work. So HDMI out, USB, and this is one of the two power cords that needs to come in. So the reason I have two power cords is I have one here for this one, kind of goes around here and into the Raspberry Pi 0W. I have had no luck with 0Ws taking power from anywhere but directly from like a USB connection, like I've got one back here. And then the second cord I have coming in where the Commodore typically has power coming in, sneaking through the case, and that's for this USB hub. So the Pi 0W only has the two USB ports, one for power and one for whatever USB devices you want. And since I have the external port as well as the keyboard, which we'll talk about in a second, I needed some additional space there. So that's what I did, and really wanted to try to get it down to one cord, but I just couldn't do it and with the equipment I had and the time that I had. You can see I bodged together some fun little USB connections to get everything plugged in. I have these adapters that would work great, but they're too big to fit next to each other here, so I ran an extension cable from USB micro, then USB micro to USB A, and then from A to the hub, and then the hub's got the two A's as well. So over here we have this board, and this is the Keyraw. I don't know if you can quite see it. This is the Keyraw V2. So this is a USB adapter for a number of vintage keyboards. You can see here I'm plugged into the C64 VIC-20 keyboard, but it also supports the C16, Commodore Plus 4, and then an Amiga 500 and Amiga 1200. So you can just modify the dip switches here and select the kind of keyboard, the English, whether or not it's an Amiga, things like that. It also has support for gamepads over here built in. It's not truly a gamepad support. It emulates pressing, I think, ASDF and then the arrow keys maybe for the other ones. So if your games support key mapping for moving around, they'll work fine. But if they require an actual joystick, these little ports over here don't quite work for that. So there's other ways to do it. You can get USB adapters, and obviously I do have a couple of USB ports free here that I could do that if I wanted, but I've got real C64 hardware, and this is just kind of like a fun little project to do, so I'm not too nervous about not having joystick support. But yeah, this is the original keyboard from this machine. I presume it's definitely a C64 keyboard, but everything fit neatly in here. I tried to do a little bit of cable management with things, and then of course the hot glue. So what's supposed to happen with the Keyraw 2 is it's got the old square USB connection that you can plug power into, and I thought that was going to be pretty slick, and I spent a lot of time trying to get that to work, but I never could quite get it. So if I power from here, power gets through the cord, and if I plugged it into the power port on the 0W, it would boot up no problem, get full power, everything was great. But then the keyboard wouldn't be detected by the Raspberry Pi. And if I powered the key-raw through the USB hub or plugged it in directly to the Pi Zero, then it would the keyboard would work. So it's supposed to be able, I believe, and I have the instructions, and I think that's what they say, but you're supposed to be able to plug in power here, and then you have this dongle that's onto a pin header that's just tied right into it that is supposed to take the signal and send it on to whatever you plug it into. But unfortunately, I just couldn't get that to work. I also did take the keyboard out and hooked the Key-Raw V2 up to my Windows 11 PC, and sure enough, it works great. So you can take a empty shell of a C64 case, get a Key-Raw, put it in. You don't need the Raspberry Pi, but you can use it as a keyboard for your modern computer if that's something you're interested in, which I thought was cool, but I thought putting an RPI in here was cooler. This didn't come with a Raspberry Pi, I just happened to have this one laying around. And obviously the USB hub was mine. Well, I don't know if it's obvious, but USB hub was mine too, and the Key-Raw did come with it. So it's a pretty cool little thing that I guess I didn't know existed, but makes sense that it does. And you know, it's got some screws here holding it down, and the 3D printed things are here as well. So everything that's been modded in this case is 100% reversible. Hot glue comes off this plastic easily. The screws are in the original screw holes for the C64, so no new screw holes were drilled. So we can put this back to a stock C64 if we want. The gentleman's mother did include the board with it. I tried it out, it doesn't work, so I'm gonna definitely look at that in a future video, but for now I didn't want to mess with that, and since I had the Raspberry Pi and all this other stuff I really wanted to try out, that's what I did. So it was a pretty cool little project. Let's close this up. All right, so running the emulation software, you can just download it from the web, but you just copy it to a FAT32 SD card, copy some ROMs to it that you have to find elsewhere. And those are ROMs for the C64, the basic ROM, the floppy ROM, and there's one more ROM as well, I believe. But it's in the instructions. You just have to do a Google search and find those ROMs. They're out there. Not a big deal. And then you pop it in your Pi and it boots right up. So one thing I had trouble with is that you're supposed to be able to press Control and F7 over here, and that's supposed to take you to the emulation menu. It didn't work for me, it still doesn't, but I was able to modify the config file on this to make, so what I had to do to modify the config file, I plugged in a USB keyboard, disconnected the C64 keyboard, and then you press F12 on that to get into the menu. And then from there, you can modify some additional things. So if I do that now, I don't have an F12, obviously, and Control F7 doesn't work, but I modified it so Control F1 takes us into the emulation menu. Once I was here with the USB keyboard, I could go into keyboard setup here, and I just made Control and the Commodore key all be menu. So by default, it was just Control plus F7 and the Commodore key, which is this guy here. It's supposed to take you to this menu, but neither of those worked. Modified it with a real keyboard, and now I can get into this with just the C64 keyboard. So that would have been a deal breaker if I needed to plug in a USB keyboard to change ROMs over, and luckily I was able to work around that. So in the menu here, and obviously, you know, you use the keyboard to navigate things. So you've got the cursor here, which goes down, and then Shift, cursor takes you back up. You can apply any cartridge you have copied to it. So if I go to attach cart, I can pick any of the cartridges that I've loaded on here. So you can see I had Maze Master selected most recently. So let's just pick a different one. Let's just pick, I don't know, Mutant Spiders, the. And that'll load up the Mutant Spiders. So it's pretty simple. It took me a long time to figure out how to get everything wired up. It was definitely a bit of a learning curve with the emulation software, but again, it's not too bad. The documentation for it isn't wonderful, but you can make your way through it and you can get this thing running. Oh, and one more thing, I do have a full Raspberry Pi Linux install in here, so I can take out the card that's got the emulator on it and just boot up a regular Linux. And since this is a 0W, it has Wi-Fi, so we can do web browsing, you know, basic operations, whatever you can do on a Pi. And then with the external USB port, which is here, you can hook up a mouse, so you can obviously navigate the web that way. So yeah, hope this video is interesting. If you have any questions about the process or any questions about this emulator, hit me up, drop a comment. I'm happy to help you out if you're trying to figure something out. But overall, this is a really fun project. So thanks for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day.